Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It's time for another one of our segments that we call Proper Theology. And you'll remember that we call it Proper Theology because we're doing theology proper. That is, we're speaking about the character of God himself. But you may think that I'm saying something decidedly improper for this particular segment because the thesis that I would like to expound upon and defend in this particular segment is this: that God is self-promoting. God is self-promoting. Now, the reason that might seem improper to you is that we are well aware that the Bible is crystal clear in discouraging us from being self-promoting. We're not to promote ourselves. We're to seek out places of humility. We're to not toot our own horn or stand on the street corners. We do not, or should not rather, self-promote. And yet, God not only is a self-promoter, but it is a good thing that he is a self-promoter. Well, how is this not, you might rightly ask, an example of hypocrisy on God's part? God saying to us, do as I say, not as I do. Well, we come to that, or we're tempted toward that particular error of thinking that this demonstrates God's hypocrisy because we misunderstand the motive behind God's discouraging us towards self-promotion. God tells us and calls us to humility, not because it is a characteristic of righteousness always and everywhere for all beings to be humble. There is no law that says all beings should not promote themselves. If there were, the charge against God for hypocrisy would certainly stick. The reason, however, that God calls us to humility is because of a different law. The different law is no creature should be self-promoting. Only God should be self-promoting. Only God is worthy of pursuing his own glory. Of course, God is self-promoting. We know the Bible says that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows forth his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and there is no language where it's not heard. Well, what's the message? What is the message of the creation? This vast, swirling ocean of stars. The message is, God is glorious. God is glorious. God is glorious. What is the message of the beauty of this planet? God is glorious. God is glorious. God is glorious. What is the message of history? Well, history, friends, is his story. That story which says, God is glorious. God is glorious. God is glorious. And what, friends, what song are we going to be singing forever and ever and ever? God is glorious. God is glorious. God is glorious. We are not made to toot our own horn, but we are made to be heralds of the glory of the living God. God is not shy about it, friends. Read your Bibles. It's all through there. God boasting. I'm God. I'm God. How many times does God say in His Word, and then they will know that I am God? And then they will know that I am God. He's getting the message out. And He calls us who know that He is God to get that message out. God is not unhappy with us when we boast about Him, over Him, in Him. Because that's what we're supposed to do. Because He alone is worthy. And He tells us, rightly so, He will not share His glory with another. God is self-promoting as He ought to be. No hypocrisy on His part, no immorality on His part, no denial, of course, remembering the simplicity of God, that He's not also condescending and gracious and kind and stooping down to us. All of these things are true, because this is who God is. I have a little thought experiment that I like to do often in the quiet of my own head, but today I thought it would be helpful to try it again and do it here with you. Here's how the experiment works. I imagine a time in my past. It may be sparked by seeing an old car or an old television program, or even an old movie, hearing an old song. And I think, well, how far back was that? And then I go, in my mind, back to that time and go back the same distance again. And I'm shocked at how far that takes me. Let me give you an example, a simple one. It's 2020 as we speak. I'm 55 years old. So when I look back to 20 years ago, the year 2000, it's not that distant to me. I had clear adult memories of the year 2000, crystal clear. I remember the beginning of the year 2000 and the millennium bug. I remember September 2001, of course. That's just 20 years ago. But you go 20 years before that, and you end up in 1980. 1980. In January, Jimmy Carter is still president. By February, Ronald Reagan is in his first weeks of his presidency. As far back from here to 2000, going back from 2000, the same distance back you get in 1980. It's also the year the Steelers won their 4th Super Bowl. It's quite a ways back. But I can do this with 30 years too. You go back 30 years from now, it takes you to 1990. Remember 1990? Little thing called the end of the Cold War happened that year. The Berlin Wall came down. The Warsaw Pact was dismantled. Free and elections came to Eastern Bloc countries. That was 30 years ago. Some of you remember that. But 30 years before that was 1960, which I don't remember because I wasn't born yet. The gap between 1960 and 1990 is rather more significant, is it not, than the gap between 1990 and 2020. Let's try it once more. Start in 2020, go back 40 years. I can do that, and it goes back to 1980. We've already talked about 1980 when we went back 20 years. Now you go back 40 years. 1980. It's a little fuzzier. It's a little bit more distant. I wasn't an adult. There was no internet. But go back the same distance from there, and the United States hasn't even joined World War II. Are you kidding me? How is it possible I can remember things very clearly from 40 years ago, and yet 40 years before that is a whole nother world? Hitler is ruling in Germany, Stalin in the Soviet Union. Sitting in the White House is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Time, friends, is tricky. Holidays is, again, one of those times when we tend to take in and imbibe of nostalgia. At least I do. And when we do that, we have that experience of the continuity of our consciousness. That 15-year-old me in 1980 that was watching on a 19-inch console television that was connected to a metal antenna up in the attic, watching the Steelers beat the Rams and win the Super Bowl. That's the same guy that I am now. Oh, I was a lot thinner and my hair was a lot thicker, but it's the same guy. And remember, it works the other way too. What's 2040 going to be like? 2050? 2060? There's no goal here to this thought experiment. I'm not trying to solve a mystery. I'm just trying to experience more fully the mystery of time, the mystery of aging, the mystery of history. I don't know. I may have more questions along this line in another segment. Remember when we started? That was like 6 minutes ago. My, how things have changed. On today's Curating Your Book Library, depending on how you look at it, I'm either going to commend to your reading 0 books or many books, because I thought I would take the time today to consider a particular genre that tends to be of great interest to me, and I spend a fair amount of time reading in it. That genre is science fiction. For those of you who are science fiction aficionados, to give my bona fides in terms of my interest in the genre, you should know that I have read the absolute complete, every single prequel, sequel, addendum of the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, every last word of it. That I have read the complete works of Cordwainer Smith, that I have multiple collections of Philip K. Dick stories. I have reviewed Ray Bradbury's The Illustrated Man right here on this program. And there's more, many, many more that I've read. In fact, I remember this started for me years ago when I was in high school, I had a friend who had a subscription to Omni Magazine. Now, Omni Magazine was devoted to issues of science, and included in every issue was at least 3 short stories of a science fiction nature. And I read through every one of those through probably 3 or 4 years worth of monthly magazines. So I read a lot of short stories there as well. Now the question is, why? What do we like? What appeals to us about science fiction? And I can say for me, it's not the science. That is, there are certain science fiction writers who sort of feel like it's their goal as a writer to lay out the plausibility of their various scientific theories. And so you get, it's sort of like Melville on whaling, or Tom Clancy on strategic warfare, where they're just kind of showing off their knowledge. And if you know enough, it can sort of pick you up and carry you along and teach you things. But I'm so far away from that level of scientific competence that it's wasted on me. What I like is the freedom that science fiction gives you to explore strange new worlds, for want of a better way of expressing it. I like the idea that we can posit strange things like time travel or deep space travel or different things of that nature. That's what appeals to me about it. That said, some of the strange things I think are wildly strange. There are 2 things that seem to me to show up in a lot of science fiction, at least science fiction that tends to make it to the silver screen. And they're these things. One that I noticed a long time ago is there tends to be a certain sterility in the future, according to science fiction writers. A certain denial of male and femaleness. You have typically uniforms that people wear. The whole culture wears the same uniform. And boys and girls dress essentially the same. And everything is sort of scrubbed clean. And there's no children and there's no family. I think that's really strange. Why is that? That's such a common part of how people view the future. The other thing is, it's sort of the opposite side, a little bit anyway, is that so oftentimes stories about the distant future are what we call post-apocalyptic stories. Now, I happen to like post-apocalyptic stories, but why is it that our writers who like to write about the future have a propensity to see a world where either it's very clean or it's very dirty, but either way, there's no families? It may be very dirty because of nuclear, war. Oh, golly, that's... By the way, I've even read an English translation of the French novel that became The Planet of the Apes. So that's another part of my bona fides. But I, of course, was thinking there about the last scene in the movie and how powerful that was. But even there, not a lot of family, not a lot of children, not a lot of husbands and wives. It's a strange, sterile world in the future. In fact, that's what has everything in common. It's a sterility, whether it is a post-nuclear dirty kind of sterility where there's just no life, but things are dirty, or whether it is a cleaned up, spit shine kind of sterility, like you might see in Logan's Run or something of that sort. Well, it doesn't change, by the way. The genre doesn't make up for bad writing. It is an opportunity for good writers to write well. So let me encourage you to give some a try. I would start, if I were you, with Philip K. Dick. He is just the best. He's the one who gave us what became Blade Runner, what became Minority Report, what became The Man in the High Castle. And he's got plenty of wonderful short stories as well. Any of the people I mentioned are also good. Philip K. Dick, Ray Bradbury, and Cordwainer Smith. As always, please let me know what you think. Let me know if you've got some favorites. Maybe I haven't mentioned. I could always use new science fiction writers. So please let us know and let us hear from you. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.